Okay, good evening everyone. I'm Claire Ritchie, Development Officer for Woodcraft Folk. Thank you for joining our webinar this evening on the role of the District Volunteer Coordinator. In a moment I'm going to hand over to Owen Sedgwick Dell, who was our New Groups Project Manager in 2014-15 and is still doing lots of useful work for Woodcraft Folk and has been a long-standing volunteer as well. First, just to say that if you've all been muted to maximise the sound quality during the webinar, but if you've got any questions for Owen during the presentation, please let me know via the chat function. I'll be titled as organiser when you're using your chat function. Just let me know that you've got a question. You don't necessarily need to type out the question, and I will unmute you and you can ask your question to Owen and he can respond, and then I'll mute you again. So I think that's all the arrangements, and I think we'll hand over to Owen now. Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Claire. Good evening, everyone. As Claire said, my role with Woodcraft has been over the last couple of years to manage the new project that took place in Scotland and West Yorkshire and Merseyside and North Wales. And as part of that, we've learnt lots of useful lessons, and the job I'm on at the moment is translating that into some new guidance for leaders and volunteers in the organisation. I've planned to rattle on at you for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and as Claire said, I'm very happy to be interrupted if it's a case of you'd like clarification so that you don't get lost in what's going on. So do please jump in by text to Claire, and then she'll try and shut me up and jump in with questions. When I refer to resources, which I'm going to, and I'm going to tell you that they're on the website, to make sure that you find things that are on the website, I will, when this goes live as on the website as a recorded thing, I'll make sure that underneath there are all the links to the documents and the resources that I've referred to, because I know sometimes finding things on the website is not the easiest task. I thought it would be helpful just to start with looking at who we mean by our volunteers, particularly in groups where the majority of our volunteers are also parents, and that's many of our groups. People don't necessarily think of themselves as doing volunteering because they're kind of just helping out with the group that their kid goes along to. When we talk about volunteers, when I talk about volunteers tonight, I'm talking about all of these people, whether they're parents or non-parents, whether they help every single week or whether they help once or twice a term. In fact, whether they're members of Woodcraft Folk or not. So for the avoidance of doubt, I'm talking about the role of the volunteer coordinator being to support and guide anybody who's helping Woodcraft groups to function, to work. I just thought it would be helpful to start with an overview of what we mean by the role of the volunteer coordinator. I'm working from the version of a role description that's in the volunteer toolkit, which I shall be referring to several times. It's not the only job description for a volunteer coordinator out there, and it's very much up to you what that role encompasses, but that's been my starting point. Unlike a district coordinator or a safeguarding coordinator, it's not an absolute requirement that you have a volunteer coordinator, but we still really do encourage districts to have someone who's looking after volunteers, or at the very least considering how some of the essential bits of this role get done by somebody. Our research and our feedback from members supports the idea that volunteers are the most valuable resource we've got as an organisation, and we need to invest in supporting them if we're actually to succeed in doing what we do. So your group and district needs somebody who's thinking about the needs of volunteers if it's going to be serious about growing or sustaining itself beyond the enthusiasm of the current crop of leaders that you've got at the moment. I suppose it's one of those things that becomes more important the bigger your district, the more volunteers you have, the more it's important that somebody is looking after their needs and thinking about coordinating them. It becomes important if you've got many groups, multiple groups in a district, that there's somebody who's got the oversight to join up the dots. I think also if you've got a high turnover of volunteers, like you might have in a largely parent-led group where kids move on to the next age group and so do your volunteers, then it's also really important to plan against your future need and have someone who's taking that long view. It is a role that doesn't need to be hands-on with young people. It might suit somebody who wants to support the district in some way, but the idea of standing in front of 20 young people just fills them with dread. Or it might be they just can't commit to attending group nights on a regular basis, because a lot of the a lot of the work of this role can be done at other times and in between times. I think it's helpful if you've got someone who's vaguely familiar with how a group would operate. It might be a good role if you've got a kind of elder statesperson in your district who's been there, done that, got lots of insight to offer, but still wants to be supportive in some way. I suppose if you haven't got somebody who's being volunteer coordinator, the role is going to fall to other people. Your district coordinator will be responding to inquiries, your group leaders will be publicising opportunities to get involved and doing induction, and your membership secretary will be doing things like following up expressions of interest from new volunteers as part of our screening of new volunteers. I'm just going to step back to a bit of theory, and this is a really useful diagram which is in the volunteer pack, volunteer toolkit as well. So it's a helpful way of looking at the interaction that a volunteer has with Woodcraft or with any other organisation. So it would start when we recruit a new person to the organisation. We would give them a suitable induction to the organisation, which tells them what they're going to need to know for the role that they're going to be performing. We would hopefully offer them some sort of training, either formally or informally, to get up to speed. We would support them on an ongoing basis to troubleshoot any issues that they've got, and then hopefully the chance to progress if they want to take on more responsibility or perform a different role within the organisation, at which point the whole cycle starts again. You can get them to the new role and give them any training and so on. So that diagram, keep that in your mind, because it's a helpful lens to look at what a volunteer coordinator should actually be doing. Fairly obviously, you're getting out there and promoting opportunities for new volunteers to get involved in the work of the organisation. You'd be overseeing, if not actually doing yourself, enrolment and induction of new volunteers. This is one of the things where we can be quite difficult as an organisation to know what's going on and who's who. And I think as a volunteer coordinator, you've got a chance to act as a real hand holder to help match people to the right role, but also just make sure that path smooths as people move from getting in touch with us to getting their DBS done and all those other sorts of things. People's first impressions of an organisation are really important, and if we screw that up when they first get in touch, it's very likely that they won't progress to being a long-term volunteer with us. So we need to think about training needs, not just of new volunteers, but also of existing volunteers. You might not be providing training yourself, or you might be. It could be part of the role. Another thing to say is it's not always about sending people on a course or doing a training session. There's lots of ways you can develop people's skills. It could be shadowing, it could be watching back a webinar on the website, it could be reading around a subject or doing some research or visiting another group in your area to get inspiration. You will be providing ongoing support to volunteers. That might be discussing issues and concerns that people have got. It might be kind of troubleshooting or problem solving, or it might even be conflict resolution, because believe it or not, occasionally volunteers fall out with each other. And that might be something where part of the support that your volunteers need is somebody to come in and actually just get them back on track. And as people move on and develop in their roles, you've got a role to play in signposting them to different opportunities that exist both within and out with the movement, support, advice, and further training that they might want to take up. So those are that's kind of the role in a nutshell, and that's what we kind of expect a volunteer coordinator to be concerning themselves with. Sorry, Claire, are you going to get another question there?
No, I've not got any questions. I was just going to say, you've got quite a lot quieter as you've been going through. I don't know whether you're able to make yourself a little bit louder would be good.
Okay, is that any better?
Yeah, I think that's better again. I don't know if you were just moving away from the microphone or something. But
I think I might be moving away from my mic. I will try and maintain this kind of volume. Okay, so moving on then. Again, I thought it would be useful just to look at, as background, to look at Clearly you need to be in touch with your district coordinator. In this form, there's something of a go-between, and you're kind of building blocks, as I said. Your district coordinators based on your district, and they'll be on the receiving end of lots of inquiries from the outside world, and they'll have a lot of relationships and links that are useful to you. You'll need to be in touch with your membership secretary so that you can help your new volunteers.
Yeah. Oh, and that's actually, the sound's got a lot worse, and I've got messages from other people saying it's also not working for them. So I'm not sure what's happened, but if we can try and sort it out, it would be much better.
Yeah, it would be. Hold on. How's that?
Keep talking because it's just.
Any better? 1, 2.
It's still a bit fuzzy, and.
Let me just go and see if I am. See if it's fallen off. Setting I put it on for some reason.
Yeah, just take your time because it's worth being able to hear you properly.
Yeah,
I think.
Okay, is that any better?
Keep talking.
No?
It's still a bit fuzzy. Yeah.
I can change to something else and see if that is any better.
It was perfect at the start, and then it just seemed to be.
How about that? Is that any better?
Yes, that seems better. If you could make it even slightly louder, that would be good. But if you can't, don't worry. It's a lot clearer than it was.
I will see what I can.
No, that's good. That's good now.
Is that good? Okay. Shall I crack back on with what I was doing before?
Do you mind starting that slide again? Because I don't think anybody heard the beginning of it. Probably. What the slide that you were on?
Okay. I'll see what I can do. Let's try that again then.
Sorry, it's not so handy for your flow, but
that's all right.
We can hear you now, which is good.
That's fine. That's probably going to have more benefit overall. Okay. Yes. So yeah, just to run through those key relationships, you've got to be in touch with your district coordinator. You've got to be in touch with your membership secretary so that your new volunteers can get their DBSs and their PVGs done. Your group leaders are going to be the people who have, by and large, got the handle on what the needs of the group are, and they will know best where they need help and what particular skills and experience they need. New and existing volunteers, you need to maintain the dialogue and keep those relationships open even after a formal induction is completed, so that you know those people well and you know what their needs are. And parents and carers of the children in the groups. The majority of our volunteers across the UK are also parents of children who attend our groups. You can't require that parents volunteer, or at least you can't if you want to remain inclusive as a group, which as a Woodcraft group you would obviously wish to. But that doesn't mean you can't ask. It's entirely reasonable to ask new parents and carers how they could support the running of the group. It may be different from other groups they've been part of before, that it is entirely volunteer run, and sometimes you need to ram that message home that it doesn't happen if nobody's prepared to step forward. Looking outside the organisation, as a volunteer coordinator you might need to nurture a range of different relationships. Key is going to be a relationship with the Volunteer Bureau. You will have one in your area. The quality of them and the leads that they generate does vary hugely. It's one of the things we found as part of the New Groups project, just the disparity between how many leads we got from volunteer bureaus in different places. But if you foster a personal relationship with whoever does their volunteer recruitment, if you can get in touch and get that person to know who we are and what we do, then it will help increase both the number and the quality of the leads that you get out of it. I would say don't bet the farm on every lead turning into a long-term volunteer though, because that just ain't the way it goes. Colleges and universities in your local area is a good source of usually sort of short-term volunteers. You might want to target particularly students who are on a relevant course like teaching or child development and want more experience before they, before they go out into the world of work. Some universities and student unions have got dedicated volunteer centres, or there's Student Community Action as well, which is a national organisation that does what it says on the tin. The other thing to look out for is DF-age woodies who've been involved in other parts of the country who are coming to university in your town or city, because that's another good source of people to recruit who might want to stay in touch with their woody roots. You should already have a relationship with your local council for voluntary service. Most places have got one or something like it. Sometimes they're called something different, but they are, the meeting place for all voluntary sector organisations in the area. They can provide free or low-cost training very often. They also can do things like fundraising advice and networking opportunities, and they're just a good place to be. Perhaps less obviously, if you've got big local employers, they might be able to publicise volunteering opportunities as part of their kind of corporate social responsibility or community work. It could be particularly useful if you're looking for a specific role, like can you circulate people in their finance department if you're looking for a treasurer? You haven't got those skill sets immediately next door. Oftentimes they've got supported volunteering schemes where, if people give their time in the community, it's matched with a certain amount of time out of work. Sometimes it's more along the lines of a sort of community challenge type project where you might get a bunch of middle managers to come and do something like paint a mural for a day, which might not be what you want, but if you do have a short-term job like that, you can get somebody to come along and do it for nothing, and they'll usually chuck in the materials and resources as well. So that might suit a one-off task if you've got something like that needs doing. And also make links with like-minded groups in your area, as long as you're not going to be fighting over the same pool of volunteers. Trade unions, environmental groups, Amnesty International groups, people like that, they've got networks of members and activists, they've got newsletters and social media that you can piggyback on. You might pick up regular volunteers, you might pick up new young members to join your groups, or you might pick off one-off guest speakers, for example, which would again be a benefit. Moving on, I'm going to look at some of the key resources that will be there to help you. The absolute Bible is the Volunteer Toolkit, which I've already referred to a couple of times. This was actually, I believe, a Woodcraft Folk Scotland resource, if I'm right, Claire. But it's universal, and it's full of helpful background, helpful templates, helpful theory, and lots of practical advice about how to support volunteers on a day-to-day basis, what to do if, have you thought of this, and it's a really good place to look. There's also the volunteer guide. There's a PDF of this that sits within the volunteer toolkit, but you probably would have seen the hard copy as well. It's got lots of different ideas, more ideas than you can possibly imagine about different roles that people can do to support Woodcraft folk. Everything from being a group leader or a camp coordinator, all the way down to very light touch things like driving people to give them lifts to group or doing the shopping for a residential. And it's really helpful just to go, oh yes, that would help if we had someone to do this job. There are lots of hard copies of it at Folk Office, so if anyone wants them sending out, let me know, or drop me an email afterwards and we can send you out some copies, because they're really good to encourage particularly parents to have a look and see what they could do. It's kind of broken down by, have you got lots of time, have you got a little time, which is a helpful approach. Also, there's a series of case studies from different Woodcraft groups around the country who tried, as part of the Tree Project, different ways of recruiting volunteers. So it's a kind of, what the problem was, what we did, what we learned. They're 2 sides of A4 with some pictures. They're a quick read. They're really accessible, and they've got lots of recommendations that you can put into practice in your own group, which is really positive. We have got templates of flyers and posters. We've created some of these as part of the New Groups project. We can help you to find the right one for you. Some of them are downloadable templates that you can edit and run off in your own printer. Some of them is print-ready PDFs that you can get commercially printed. So all of that exists on the website. Go and have a look round. As part of the New Groups project, one of the things we did was created an enrolment form for new volunteers. It might sound a bit formal, but the way we ended up using it was more as a script for a conversation to have with a potential volunteer. Not just asking them what skills they could offer, but also what they were hoping to get out of it. So we had a bit more of an insight into what volunteers were trying to gain and why they were volunteering for us, which was really useful. Just the process of asking them those questions and recording the answers. So think about using the enrolment forms to guide those initial discussions with volunteers so you cover all the bases. You will need volunteer role descriptions if you're going to recruit volunteers who are aware of what it is we're going to ask them to do. There are examples online, but they're quite generic. The best ones are going to be written very locally. They're going to be rooted in the way that your group runs, and they're going to be specific about exactly what you're looking for. Be realistic, but think about what people might be looking for. Use keywords that you think people might be putting into a search engine in a volunteer centre. Is it going to be outdoors? Is it going to be active? Is it going to be working predominantly with children? Is it going to be back office? Is it going to be paper based? Think about it. Make your job descriptions as specific as you want, and don't assume that people are familiar with the organisation when you write them. Your induction checklist is another kind of touchstone for you as a volunteer coordinator. You will need to decide as a district, so with other volunteers, what is part of your induction for new volunteers. It will depend entirely on the volunteer's role, what depth they need to know it in. Ideally, it won't just be a list of things to read. It will be, you need to know a bit about this, here's how you could find out about that. Observe a group in process, go and visit another group in the area, things like that. However, as a bare minimum, it needs to include being familiar with key policies that they're going to need to know about in order to be able to work within our groups, in particular our safeguarding policies. And finally, the local safeguarding plan. It's all very well having the top level, this is what we do to keep children and young people safe. Your local safeguarding plan is the thing that you have to have that tells all volunteers how we actually keep children and young people in our groups safe on a day-to-day basis. And that's essential for you as a volunteer coordinator to be very familiar with, so that you can model the right behaviour and you can introduce people to the right ways of doing things that you as a district have all agreed on. So those are some of the tools in the arsenal. I think when you're providing support to groups, and ensuring that we attract new volunteers into our organisation, one of the most useful things you can do is provide a bit of a constructive challenge to the volunteers and go, so you've told me you've got this problem, what would solve it for you? I think the different ways that groups are organised is going to drive to some extent the different needs that they've got and the different solutions there might be to that. This ties into some work I'm doing at the moment on the volunteer handbooks about looking at different group models and what the kind of strengths and weaknesses are. Being very general, if you've got a small team of volunteers, succession planning is really important. Volunteers do get burnt out, and if it's a small team, it can be really vulnerable. How do you know when that person needs to step back, and how are you going to manage that? Is there space for new volunteers to get involved? Or have we just fallen into the trap of the existing old hand going, oh, well, it'll take too long to show somebody how to do this. It'll just be easier if I keep doing it for the time being. Because that's when you will need to make a challenge and go, yeah, but you're not going to do it forever. And making space is also about being open to different ways of working. If new volunteers are coming in, they're going to want to have a bit of ownership. They're going to have new ideas about how to do stuff. I think if we expect them to do what we've always done just because we've always done it that way, then their experience of volunteering with us is not going to be all it could be. If you've got tons of volunteers to support your group, that's great, but you're going to have other sorts of problems. You need to make sure that the systems you've got for communicating with each other is effective and robust. It needs to be very clear in a large group where lots of people are sharing responsibility. Who is accountable for the decisions? How are those being made? And is that including everybody who needs to be included in that? Another thing that happens if you've got a shifting group of leaders who are working on a rota, are the ground rules and the expectations about behaviour, both by young people and by volunteers, consistent week to week, or does it depend who's running the session, what you can get away with? It's important for the children and young people, but it's also for volunteers to have a positive experience. They need to know what the deal is. They need to understand what the ground rules are, and it needs to be consistent from week to week. If you're in one of those groups where you have a clear distinction between leaders and helpers, we call leader-led groups sometimes, is it clear how if you're a helper you can progress to being a leader? Is it clear that that's an option that's open to people, and are you ready for people to take that step on if they've got the skills and if they've got the desire to do so? Often in leader-led groups you end up with leaders who are doing everything, and actually they would lead sessions for children and young people more effectively if maybe a task like taking the register or looking after the subs or being a contact for safeguarding or looking out for training opportunities was done by somebody else. And maybe that's where you step in as a volunteer coordinator and just provide a bit of challenge and said, would it be helpful if we found someone else who could do that for you? Would it enable you to plan sessions better or achieve more in your sessions, or just enjoy it more? And I suppose the other thing is that engaging with parents is going to take a bit more effort if you're a leader-led group. Maybe you need to run a welcome session for new parents so that they understand what it is that we're trying to achieve and how they can help. If you're in one of those groups where the majority of people are parents, again, maybe you're doing it on a rota basis. One of the big challenges with that is that as a non-parent who would like to volunteer with Woodcraft Folk, if everybody else has got kids in the group, you can feel a bit out of place. Do you provide a welcoming environment for people who aren't parents, or do you just feel that it's a bit suspicious that they want to be part of your group? Have you become a bit of a clique? It can be that you fall into that space where your kids go to the same school, you know each other from the school gate, you occasionally socialise together, and that can make it quite difficult for new people to break in and feel included, not because you're doing anything consciously, but because you need to just take a step back and make sure that they're included and they're invited. And the big challenge is managing your own child's behaviour if you're running a group, and other volunteers can support you hugely in managing that. There are lots of good examples out there of ways that groups manage that, and that's something it's really important to encourage volunteers to talk about. I've mentioned inclusion in the broadest sense already, but I think it's worth going through as well some of the ways in which it might be helpful to think about your own practice and how that supports an inclusive group, both in terms of children and young people, but also the volunteers that support your group. A really big one is money. If you've got a clear policy about expenses, then everyone goes into it with their eyes open. Is it appropriate that you expect people to put their own hand in their pocket to buy resources? Can you afford to reimburse them from subs? Has that been made clear to people? How long will they have to wait to be reimbursed, or can they get money from petty cash for small items? How are you going to manage that so that even if you don't have access to a credit card that you can stick it all on till the end of the month, you can still lead a session and have the resources that you need to do it? Again, financially, for volunteers to participate in things like residentials, they're really important parts of being part of Woodcraft Folk in my view. But actually, is it reasonable to expect somebody who works long hours in full-time in a job to give up some annual leave, come on camp, work jolly hard, and pay the same as everybody else for the privilege, particularly if they are, a non-parent and don't have their own child there, and it's not an opportunity for them to have time away with their own kids. There's no hard and fast answers to this, but it's one of those things that it would really help you to have a shared idea and a shared understanding as a district, as a group, in order that you've got something you can communicate clearly to potential volunteers. Do you recruit, and if you do recruit, do you retain volunteers that are different to the people you've already got engaged in your organisation, or do they just look like everybody else? If they do look like everybody else, then what do you think the barriers might be to people volunteering with us? Do we only ever put out leaflets at one school, not the school down the hill? And does that mean that we don't ever get kids off the council estate or whatever? So there's things that you need to think about how you recruit both children and potential volunteers. Also, the publicity material that you use. Does it show a diverse group of volunteers? Does it show the group of volunteers that you'd like to have? Do you use language that's accessible to everybody? Have you thought about where you advertise in order to reach specific groups who you might really want to have volunteering with you but don't currently put themselves forward? Do we expect the person to fit into the role, or are we willing to fit the role to the individual? Can we think flexibly? This might be about somebody's disability or additional needs. It might be about working pattern. It might be about the fact they need childcare because they've got younger kids, or it could be about loads of other factors. But it's just a question to ask yourself, how flexible are we able to be? A particular thing that we can do to help that is supervised volunteering. Sometimes ability to get a clear DBS check through is a barrier, and not necessarily for reasons that we need to be worried about. If you've recently arrived in the UK, if you're on low income, or if you've got complicated family circumstances, there's all sorts of reasons why you might not be able to provide the correct documentation to get a DBS check. Supervising volunteers means that with a named one-to-one supervisor, they can still volunteer to a certain extent with our organisation, even if they can't scrape together the ID that they need in order to get a DBS check, and that's something to think about. There's loads more to say about how to be inclusive, and that's probably a whole other webinar in its own. I think it boils down to a willingness to think again about any aspect of what we do and ask if there's another way we could do it. The moment we hear ourselves going, well, we've always done it like this, then we probably need to think again. Finally, just a note of caution on that one. We are an organisation for children and young people. That's our charitable purpose. Volunteering with us isn't an absolute right for people. We need to be wary of bending over backwards to accommodate people to the extent that it actually compromises our ability to run effective groups for children and young people, and particularly safe groups for children and young people. For example, if you've got a volunteer who's got additional needs to the extent that they're going to need close supervision or support from another volunteer, maybe you can't do that now because you haven't got enough resilience and enough volunteers within your group to make that happen. Maybe you need to park it until your group is stronger and better resourced. It's just an example of the sort of discussion and debate that can come up. The thing to remember is we are here to provide groups for children, and that's our primary purpose, and that's what we should be doing. So, having had an overview of what you might be doing as a volunteer coordinator, what could you do? What will you do as a result of being part of this webinar? What could you do next? I suppose I've taken a leaf out of the volunteer guides book and gone, well, if you've got an hour, what could you do in an hour? You could get in touch with your local volunteer centre, fill in their registration form, or if you're already linked in, update the profile and the adverts they've got there so they've got the right contact details on them and they reflect the needs that you've actually got. You could make an hour to sit down with the group leaders in your district to discuss what support they need, who they'd like to recruit, and what skills gaps they've got. You could have a look at your local CVS and circulate your existing volunteers with opportunities to get some training on safeguarding or sensible outdoor play or risk assessment or something like that. That would be a useful use of your time to support existing volunteers. You could make contact with a big local employer and see if they can help you out with employee supported volunteering. Or you could get in touch with your own trade union branch or the trades council in your area and see if they could put out a call for membership, a call for volunteers in their next newsletter. So those are just some off-the-cuff ideas of things you could do right now to make a difference to your group. If you've got a bit longer, maybe it's about looking at whether the processes that you've got as a district are fit for purpose and that you're well set up to manage volunteers effectively. What do you do if you get an inquiry from a potential volunteer? Do you know who does what, and can you agree how this should work in principle and then make it happen? Have you got an induction checklist? Have you got that agreed by everybody? Or even a welcome sheet that you can give to new volunteers. There's some good examples out there from the Leeds project of the one side of A4 or A5 that you give to people when they bring their kid along for the first time to go, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is how you can help. And that's a really useful thing to have. Again, there's a template on the website for doing a skills audit where you just sit down with your existing volunteers and you just go, what are we good at? What could we be better at? And then you can think of ways to address those skills gaps that you've got, either by commissioning some training in, doing some training, or by recruiting volunteers who've got those skills, and it might give you a pointer about where you might go and look for them. You could plan a training day. Again, I know Leeds has had a great deal of success with using the templates for running bite-sized training sessions that exist on our website, and running 3 or 4 of them back to back over a Saturday or a Sunday for all the groups in an area to come together and skill up, and that can work really well. You can mix that in with some skill sharing or just sharing some favourite games, or even buying in a trainer to give you something like some first aid training or something more specific that you need, that you've identified as a need. And the other thing I'd urge people to do is the Working Together programme. This was written for us with Woodcraft input by the Co-op College, and it's a really good way to encourage your district to work together. It's about agreeing common ground and agreeing ways of working that work for everybody. It's much more effective to try and prevent a situation where people misunderstand each other or get burnt out or feel that they're doing more than everybody else or feel they're particularly hard done by, rather than trying to put things out right after they've gone wrong, and working together is designed to meet that need. It's a really good thing to do to develop and support your volunteer team, to get them all singing off the same songbook, and hopefully fit to deliver excellent work with children and young people in your area. And I suppose if everything else in your garden is absolutely rosy, these are things you could be thinking to kind of turn it up to 11. How often do you check in with volunteers? Without wishing to get too worky about it, if you sat down at least once a year with every volunteer and just said how's it going, and made sure that their needs and their aspirations are being met, we'd be in a very good place. When people step back or they stop volunteering, are we asking them about what their experience of volunteering was? Is there anything that we can improve for next time? Is there anything that we could do better? I think it's also possible that you could use that opportunity to offer people a reference if their volunteering experience has been positive, as particularly if people are going on to further study or seeking work. Then that's always going to go down well, and that's going to give people a positive memory of volunteering with us. There are lots of other ways to recognise the contribution of your volunteers. We've got artwork for a volunteer recognition certificate, which was produced as part of the New Groups project, which exists online. But there might be awards locally that you could offer. You could think about nominating volunteers for. It could be anything from a pat on the head to volunteering to nominating them for an OBE, which you can do as a member of the public, believe it or not. If people are making a significant contribution, think about ways to recognise that. Get in touch with other volunteer coordinators in other organisations in your area. I know my volunteer centre has a volunteer coordinators network, which you can join and you can get in on and swap ideas and tips with people who do similar things to you. it's really important that we ask children and young people for their feedback on what we do, and so much so that we created a resource called Follow the Trail to evaluate impact of our work on children and young people. So check those resources out, because by doing that and reviewing your impact with the children and young people who participate in our groups every week, that will provide you with feedback that you can use to try and improve the work that you do as a volunteer team. So that would be another thing to think about, and use those lessons to guide the way that you work with and the way that you train and the way that you support your volunteers. And finally, if you find anything that works, tell us. You can either put it on the website as a news story, you can email Debs or myself, or you can just stick it on the Facebook group. We are only as good as our ability to share good practice with each other, so don't hide your light under a bushel. If you found something works brilliantly, if it was the most positive training you've ever done, share it, tell us, and so other districts can follow in your stead. That's it from me. It's been something of a gallop through, but I'm happy to take questions or comments that people have got, either now online, or there's my contact details there if it's something you want to discuss offline. Drop me an email and we can arrange a time to chat. I'm very happy to do so. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Owen. We'll just give people a couple of minutes to type into their chat functions if they've got any immediate questions. So if you just type to me as organiser in the chat function and just say your name and that you've got a question, I'll unmute you so that you can ask it just now. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes. We're getting thank you very much from Joanne and Georgia, which is nice.
Lovely.
Really not any questions at the moment.
Let's stunned everybody into silence.
Thank you from Lucy. Lucy doesn't sound like she has questions at the moment either. Oh, we've got one from Joanne and Georgia. I will unmute them so that they can say it themselves. Joanne and Georgia, go for it. Rather than me reading out your question, you can ask it. Thanks.
Hi there. We're just wondering, will there be any webinars on new groups and funding? Just we're thinking of setting a wood chips group up, and we've just recently enrolled as an Elephant and Pioneer group, but we're waiting for the startup grant coming through, so it's kind of holding us back a little bit. But we just wondered, where do you start off for funding?
Wow. I don't think we've got a webinar planned particularly on that subject, but I'm not sure if there's anything coming up in the diary. Have you been in touch with your local CVS already?
What's that?
Council for Voluntary Service, so the sort of umbrella group for voluntary sector organisations in your area. Have you
been in touch with the town council, but she said once the bank account's registered, we'll have to then go and speak to her.
Yeah. I think in practice you will find it difficult to do much without a bank account that people can pay pay money into, and sometimes there is that lead time. Town council is a good place to start. Your local borough council, district council might sometimes, councillors have little discretionary pots of money that they can give out. It might be. Are you using school premises?
No, we're using a church premises.
Right, because if you sometimes if you talk to schools, you can at least start up as kind of almost like an official part of their after-school program, which sometimes an after-school activity that they might publicise, which might lead you to be able to dip into, if not actual money, then certainly resources and things that you can borrow. Things that are going to have an instant turnaround, I'm slightly struggling. It might be worth dropping John Tippins an email. He's on Facebook as Woodcraft fundraiser, and he volunteers in the office a day or so a week, and he is the person who does lots of kind of little bits of fundraising here and there to support groups and districts, and comes up with some of the ideas. Have you tried local trade unions? If there's a trade union branch or anything like that, they might have, by affiliating to you or providing you a one-off donation, because it might be a case of going to the committee rather than kind of filling in a form.
Right.
That might be something that's worth trying. If you've got, branches. The big unions with the deep pockets tend to be the ones to go for. So Unite, Unison, people like that. If you know, there'll probably be a local, somewhere like Durham, there'll be a nice local trades council that you can get in touch with that might be able to help you. I think that's the best of my suggestions off the top of my head. But I would give John a bell, and also look at the funding guide, funding ideas page on the website, and I'll send you a link later.
Right, thanks very much.
Also, the treasurer, I'm not sure if it's the treasurer that does it, we've run a treasurer's webinar already, but that was more about, keeping track of district finances and how to complete the annual return that has to go to the office in London and things. But if you've got someone that's registered with Woodcraft Folk centrally as your treasurer at this point, then they get a regular email with a list of suggested funders now, because the organisation's been recognising that groups are needing more support in that area. So I'm not sure how often the email comes out, but I've seen several of them, so it possibly is monthly, but you should start getting that if you're registered as a group.
Is that funding central thing?
It's from central office,
Yeah, I've seen them. I've had a look on some of them, but there's a few of them in our area, but you have to have been running for a year.
Yeah, I think that's, most of the things that come out that way. And I mean, I get a funding bulletin from my local volunteer bureau, which is quite helpful, and occasionally, it seems to be not particularly localised, and if there's anything that's relevant to a particular area, I do tend to either stick it on the Facebook group or email people direct. Most of those are like they're bits of funding that will have an application form and a decision-making process that will take a few months, rather than be instant turnaround. It might be worth thinking about if there's anything. What is it you need to fundraise for immediately? What's the immediate need? Is it just a case of paying the hall rent for the first few weeks?
No, we know that we're getting a startup grant, but we don't know how much it is. It's just for the initial equipment, the basic things, and then obviously we'll have to pay. You get 6-month grace for a new group, so we'll have to then pay our registration fees, and we're just wondering, we don't know how much we're going to be getting yet, so it's hard to see what we're going to buy.
Yeah.
Pens and pens and things like that.
Yeah. I'll have a word with Debs tomorrow and see where we're at with it. Is that a startup grant from the Northern Region? Was that the intention?
Yeah, we know that we're going to be getting one once the bank account's up and running, but we haven't got an idea of how much or anything.
And I think you might just have to operate for the first few weeks on a cash box.
We want to all put it in and like buy some basics just to keep us ticking over.
Yeah, I mean, there's the is it woodchip group you're starting? Have you seen the 101 woodchip session ideas? Because some of those are very much about stuff you can do with the absolute bare minimum of resources.
It's Alphas and Pioneers, but today we've just come up with the woodchip one. We've just found out that quite a big demand for it, so we might as well add one of them in the week sessions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Leave it. I'll have a chat to Debs and see where we're at. But I think it will be a case of it's going to be difficult to obtain money from any official
Right.
source until you've got a bank account up and running, and I appreciate that's sometimes a bit of a challenge.
Right.
But your particular needs in County Durham are, yeah, a bit slightly unusual. We can see what we can do to help.
I think at the minute what's going to happen is the volunteers that we've got, they're all that keen to get up and running. I think we're just going to have to chip together out of our own money and see what we can come up with just to get us going.
And sometimes that's the way it goes, and if you know you've got money coming in that will underwrite that, then hopefully you won't end up out of pocket. But yeah, you might just have to take the hit in the short term.
I might just take a chance and see what comes of it.
Yeah.
It's just like everybody's quite experienced with the children and the session planning and things, but nobody's had like half a clue about fundraising, so it's all quite new.
Yeah. Fine. We'll chat about that anon, shall we, Joanne? Because probably got a few things I can think about. Perhaps if are there any other questions on any
There
of the rest
are,
of
yeah. I'm
the
going
content that we can
try.
address?
I'm going to try and unmute Lucy. I think Lucy, actually, you'll have to. Yeah, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to ask the question that you had typed to me?
Yeah, I've had a conversation with Debs actually last week, and in preparing for this and preparing for my conversation with Debs, I've started to look at the toolkit that you mentioned to do with volunteering. And the only thing is, we've been running for about 10 years, and it'd be really useful if we knew a lot more about that previously.
Excellent.
Yeah, just
where are you, Lucy? Sorry, which district are you from? Wolverhampton. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, just to do with distributing the labour between the volunteers, and also the idea of having somebody poised to step into a role, the succession plan, as it was called. I mean, that's a fantastic idea. And
It's
have
a lovely
learned
theory,
an awful
isn't
lot.
it?
Sorry?
It's a lovely theory that you've got someone waiting to take over a role. I appreciate it doesn't always work like that.
Well, no, we just seem to have come to a point where lots of the children have grown to a certain age and they're moving on, and so they're taking their parents with them. So we're hitting a bit of a lull at the moment. There is development for wood chips and another local group sort of springing off from Wolverhampton, which is great. But how to sustain our current group with the constituents we have at the moment is a bit tricky.
Yeah. When you say kids are growing out the top end, are they
just hitting GCSEs and sort of staying in to do homework rather than coming out and playing? It's like that.
Yeah. Okay. This seems reasonable. I think. I mean, one of the things that is of huge benefit is if people who have been volunteers when their children are part of it can be persuaded to stay on in some capacity. I appreciate people might not want to keep giving up their Thursday evenings, but maybe there are back office sort of things that they could be persuaded to do, which would take the immediate load off volunteers, even if they just agree to do it for a couple of terms. Our district treasurer here has been somebody who's exactly in that situation of their child who's now doing A-levels and grown out of the top adventurers, but he's been able to keep doing the treasurer role, which has been really helpful for us because it meant that we could just concentrate on running the group. Or are they able to just be there as a backstop, or be there as village elders and provide advice, support, shadowing while new people grow into those roles and take stock? That would be one thing I would maybe thinking about trying to negotiate, if that seems at all possible. Sometimes I appreciate people have just had enough, but it's worth asking. if people could find any capacity to support either, just in the short term. I think there's maybe a sense in which if you really are kind of pressing reset, you've got a completely new group of people, or inexperienced people taking it on after after a period of time. Maybe treat it as if it is a new group. Look at some of the support materials for new groups, and look at what you would need to be doing as a new group. Don't keep doing things in the way that they've been done just because they've been done like that for 10 years, because it's being done by a different group of people now, and that might be worth thinking about how we do things differently. I think some of the
Debs was going to assist with contacting the CBS on our behalf, which is, I think we've had some early contacts with them, but not recently. So that was going to be a helpful kind of perspective.
Yeah, I think about what actually needs doing. I think we can get hung up on roles like district coordinator or membership secretary or whatever. Actually, make a list of the jobs that need doing, and break them down into who's going to do them. And it doesn't have to be, a person who's got a particular job title. They're things that need doing. And if it happens to be that somebody can do all the ones that involve emailing people or registering things or doing paperwork, then give them all those jobs to do, and let the people who want to sit in front of a group of children and young people and play silly games concentrate on that. I think particularly when there's a time to develop people's experience and move them beyond their comfort zone, but actually when you're in a position where you're struggling just to keep going, I think playing to people's strengths and playing to people's enthusiasm is very much the name of the game.
Yeah, yes indeed.
I wonder if, again, local, like-minded groups and networks. Are you in trade unions? Are you in, transition town groups or anything else where you could make a call out to some of those people who might, even if they're just going to be able to come and do some sessions for you over the first, over the next term, to take the pressure off a couple of weeks. Again, those are helpful offers when you're starting out or restarting a group.
Yes, I think we have some of those contacts that you're mentioning, and in fact the person who founded Wolverhampton most recently, we founded it, is now involved strongly with the transition town group. So yeah, it's just a case of kind of joining at small dots, I think, really.
Yeah, and and if to find the space and time to do that, the group needs to have a little pause and just have a some of the most effective ways of kind of rebooting a group has been you get two people who can run some games to keep the children and young people busy, whilst anybody else who's around takes all the parents off into a room and goes, this is where we're at. The group needs this support in order to be able to carry on now. How can you help us? And, I'm part of a group that's recovered from being at the point of closure by that mechanism of going, we need more people to step forward and make this run. People were reticent, but actually we've got some bloody good leaders out of it who've thrown themselves into doing the training weekend and now feel much more confident. I'm not sure that we made them amazingly better leaders than they have potential to be already, but they just have that confidence and knowledge that, to trust their instincts to do it the right way. And we've actually got some bloody good leaders out of it. And those were people who'd been on the fringes of the group for years and just needed that push to get involved. I think the other thing is we are not very good sometimes, in my experience, at recognising people's talents. It's all very well to send out blanket emails saying we need somebody to step forward. Actually, people respond very well to a personal approach. If you can summon the summon the chutzpah to get in touch with somebody and say, do you know what, you'd be really good at this. Actually, people like that. That's a message that lands well with people, and they're more likely to respond positively to that than they are to seeing that they're one of 40 people copied in on an email asking, would it be all right if somebody did this sometime?
Yeah.
The more people you include on an email, the more easy it is for one individual to ignore it.
And it is really reassuring, the idea of having a recovered group as well, one that kind of can really blossom, because we're finding that particularly during the winter time, in the space that we have a reduced input of people during winter, but because we've got a fabulous field to play on in the summer, everyone's outdoors and everyone comes out in the summer to come out of the woodwork. So, you know, we're in our reduced numbers phase, but even though in the last couple of weeks I've had 2 additional contacts, 2 new families. So in a way I'd really like to introduce those 2 new families to a thriving group, but if I'm not careful I'm going to introduce them and sort of say, yeah, what can you do for us, sort of thing, which one's really the plan. But, you know, to have the sort of stronger backbone running.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think there are opportunities exist to make sure that people start out with an expectation of the group, which is the one that you need them to have. And if that's at odds with the way the group has run over the last 10 years, then so be it. You know, you're one of the people making it work now, and if the way it's been made to work over the last 10 years doesn't work for you, you know, you want to move to a more parent-led model, you want to move to a more hands-on model, that's great. I think the experience of groups going slightly into hibernation over the winter months is one that a lot of us share. You know, I've sort of been guilty in the past of kind of seeing group nights as that stuff that we do where we're waiting for the weather to warm up enough that we can go camping again. I think the way to counter that is to make sure that you do make hay while the sun shines. You do lots of recruitment when you're out there and able to be visible. You recruit new, not just children. Don't address your communications to children, but address them to whole families, so that you get parents who've got support, you know, who've got talent and or enthusiasm, who can come forward and help you in small ways. I know I said you've got to be careful not to be cliquey and not to end up all socialising together and feeling that, you know, it's a clique that it would be very difficult for people to break into. But it's an important part of what we get as volunteers out of our experience in the Woodcraft folk is working alongside people who share similar values to ourselves and enjoying that and enjoying being together with them and their children and occasionally even going for a beer afterwards. That's an important part of it. Some districts I know... Sorry, carry on.
We've made contacts with people who we wouldn't normally have contacts with because their children went to different schools. Our experience isn't that we've all been at the same school gate, but the organisation has brought us together, so that has been really useful for us.
Yeah.
Have been social.
Don't be afraid of that. And actually, if you can get to the point where, you know, maybe you're planning one thing that on a first Sunday of the month or whatever, you're doing something together as a group of people that's predominantly sociable, going for a walk or, you know, playing some games in the park, free of the normal things about the normal constraints of running a group night. Maybe that's a space that you can enjoy each other's company, but you can also have informal chats about the next steps and what other contacts you can work without it being constrained by a meeting and an agenda and some of those things that tend to turn people's brains to mush.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Good brainstorming.
No worries. Claire, is there anything else that we need to cover off quickly? I'm conscious we're a little beyond our hour.
I think we're okay. No, I think there don't seem to be any more questions at the moment, so I think it's probably just a case of thanking you very much for delivering the webinar this evening and thanking the people that have taken part. And just to say that this webinar has been recorded and it will hopefully be appearing on the webinars section of the website for future reference very soon. There are 2 others that have already taken place in this series, one about the role of the District Safeguarding Officer and one about the role of the District Treasurer, and they will also be on the website very soon. And then there are 2 more taking place in February, one about the Membership Secretary role and one about the District Coordinator role. So you can still book into them to listen live, or they will be also available on the website kind of by the end of February. So hopefully people will find this series useful overall. And I will just stop recording now and close the session off for this evening, if that's all right, Owen. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Claire.
Okay, night-night.
Okay.
Good night.